Друзья, легко догадаться, что на сцене будет линуксоид, потому что
It's easy to guess that the Linux guy is going to appear on stage because there's a separate computer appearing at the rostrum. Thanks to all of you have guessed so. A server would not... you remember what water is in French?
Вот, сейчас, в принципе, вот Linux тоже так читается. Linux. На этом я закончил. Моя идея была, что я начал шуметь, и те, кто стояли там, зашли.
So my idea was to start making noises so that all the people who would like to listen to the presentation should get to the room. Okay, my lord, the room is full. Pavel Filonov could speak all day, but he only has 35 minutes.
Всем привет.
Okay, hi everyone. Happy to greet all of you. I'm very happy that all of you have stood all this line and got to the room. I was hoping that it's only to myself, but that applies to everyone. I mean, welcome check. My name is Pasha Filonov, and I would like to tell you about the thing that in the past hasn't applied to any people doing Python. It was about it's Linux perf. So the question is about profiling. It appears that it applies to us as well. This is what I'm going to talk about today.
Про что, да?
Shortly.
Наверное, все-таки правильно будет начать с пролога. Вообще, почему я здесь?
Perhaps it would be right to start with like an introduction. Why
как я к этому пришел, к жизни
here,
такой.
why I'm telling you all this, and why have I arrived to all this.
А дальше по содержательной теме, да? Мы, наверное, помним
And then about the content, we remember the classic things like C profiles. Somebody even remembers the glittering profilers and C profilers. And then we come to the world where we start using the tools that were not applied to Python in the past, but are now starting to be used. It looks like you can use certain things there to make things nicer for yourself, things in the browser. So actually, not everyone knows about that. And also, deep dives. We're not going to dive really deeply today, but I'm hoping I'll be able to show you at least how deep the wormhole is. So today, our rabbit hole is. So today's examples will be just the first examples. Who has 13.12?
Через год, через два, когда-нибудь.
Well, you'll soon have in a year or two, and at the end we'll make conclusions. I'll use this excellent opportunity to be part of a conference so that I can do some self-advertising. And by the way, it's also an explanation why I'm doing this. Actually, if you ask me now why you're doing this, I'll use beautiful words, hype words. I'm a data scientist, so basically I can write code, but it's not good code. So I'm always into problems with performance. Other people like myself are strange. It looks everybody is better. But I have another side, historically. I'm also a C++ programmer, and that seems strange. So it looks like it's about performance, data scientists can't write performance code, high-performance code, but my answer is like this. The way that the fact that I can work with this language just tells me what I need to do. Also, I have another side. I like to speak. I can do it long, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 6 hours. I once spoke for 8 hours. So when I arrived, I said, I'll do a 2-hour workshop. And they told me, 30 minutes will be. In 30 minutes, you'll be stared at. And in 40 minutes, your mic will be switched off. And in 50 minutes, tomatoes will flow to you. So I decided to try and do it like this. What kind of profilers do you use when you do development in Python? If you're
конце я попробую сделать
interested, you
смертельный
can
трюк. Я попробую показать
take a
результаты
picture of
через
this QR
интернет.
code.
Как вы
At
понимаете,
the end,
первая вещь,
I'll
которая не работает на всех
try
этих конференциях,
to
это
do a trick
интернет.
and show the results
Но если не
over
получится,
internet.
потом
As you
попрошу
understand, the
организаторов
first
скинуть в
thing that
чатик.
doesn't work in all
Мне
conferences
это будет
is the internet,
полезно,
but
если
see
я
if I
все-таки захочу
can't do this, I'll
найти
ask the
где-нибудь себе
organizers
время на 2-3 часа
to
рассказать.
share it
Тогда
in a
мне будет
chat.
важно понимать,
For me,
про что
it
людям
would be
интереснее
interesting
всего.
if I can
Сегодня я,
take 2
например,
or
хочу
3
рассказать
hours to
про
speak,
Linux
and
perf.
I would
Итак,
like
я
to
надеюсь, те, кто
know what
захватили
people
все
would like to hear
софтверы.
from me. So today I'm
А
talking
я теперь
about
давайте
Linux
перейду,
perf.
собственно, к вот этому самому прологу.
And now,
У меня
let me
была
get
проблемка.
to
Все
this
начинается с проблемы.
introduction.
У меня есть
I used to have a
задачка, моя
problem.
data
Everything starts
scientistская,
with a
она там
problem. I
запускается,
had a
допустим,
task, my
регулярно
data
и должна отработать за 10 минут.
tags.
То
I
есть она
run it
отрабатывает, она молодец, все
regularly,
круто, деньги
and
льются
it
рекой,
should
все
be
довольны.
completed in 10 minutes.
Если не отрабатывает,
If
она
it does
начинает
do
что-то
so, then
пропускать,
everything's
случайные
fine, I get
там
the money.
злонамеренные
And
финансовые транзакции
if
начинают проходить,
something
аномалии
doesn't
быстро не
allow it,
обнаруживаются, деньги
so
пропадают, очень все
transactions
плохо.
stop being
И
processed, money is getting lost, and
какое-то время
everything's
все было
bad.
хорошо,
So,
все работало.
for
Моя
some time,
задачка по
it
успевала
was quite
уложиться там в
okay.
10
My task,
минут, 600 секунд.
ran
В один
within
прекрасный
10
момент у меня
minutes,
чатик начинает
600
просто
seconds.
яростно мне
But then,
сообщать, что что-то
at some
идет
point of
плохо,
time,
потому что
my chat
начиная с
started
какого-то
to
времени
notify
что-то пошло
me
не так.
that everything's
Скорее всего,
bad
накопились
because
какие-то
something
данные, что-то
started
поменялось
to
в этой
go
системе. В общем, она
wrong from
перестала
some point.
укладываться. А
Maybe
там как
some
раз идея
data
в том, что она
changed the
должна успевать.
system
Если она
and
не
it
успевает, это немножко
stopped being in
бесполезно.
time. And the whole
И
idea
видя
is
такую
about it
картину,
being in
понимаю, что
time.
там что-то
So seeing this
тормозит
picture,
явно,
understand
причем
that something,
уже тормозит сильно,
making it
достаточно.
work
Я, конечно, думал, так,
slowly.
что делать? Что делать?
So what to do?
Есть
What?
замечательная техника, профилирование. Я
There's
просто
a
могу
great,
взять
a great
какой-то
technique,
инструмент,
profiling. I can
запустить
take
его
some
на мой код, и он быстренько покажет,
run it on my
где
code,
вообще
and
она
it will show
тормозит.
me
То есть примерно в каком участке кода
where
большую часть времени
becoming
программа
slow,
проводит.
at which part
И
of the code
инструментов
the
таких
program
традиционно
is spending
много.
most of the time.
И интересно,
And
что
there
они
are traditionally a
предоставляют и
lot of
разные
such tools.
возможности, и разные
It's also
ограничения.
interesting that
По сути,
have
сегодня
different
как раз про один такой
capabilities and
новый
different
инструмент, который у нас появляется
restrictions.
сегодня. Сначала с
And
классикой.
today I'm going
Всегда
to
нужно
talk
начинать
about
с классики.
a
Классика —
tool
это
like that
просто
that we have in Python. But let's start with the
Можно
classics.
включить
The
на весь
classics
код,
is C
можно
profile.
включить только на один участок. У меня
You
был участок
can
кода.
apply it to
Я,
the
знаете,
whole
я очень так
code
люблю
or to a
делать.
part
У
of it.
меня одна
I had a part of
функция
the
есть,
code.
обычно
You
вот
know,
в ней
this
все
is the way I
сосредоточено, а
like it
дальше она
very much.
начинает там
I usually
расходиться,
have a
там
function
может быть
that's
какая-то асинхронщина начинается. Но вот
the
зато эту
focus
функцию
of
всегда
this
удобно обложить всеми декораторами,
program.
ее удобно обложить всеми переходчиками
And
исключений. Ну, в общем,
it's
такая
this function
видно,
that
сишник
it's
main, ему
convenient
не хватает явно
to
main, да?
instrumentalize.
И благодаря тому, что у C-профайла, вообще говоря,
So,
есть
because C profile has a context manager, you can profile just the part of code that you suspect. I think everybody
Естественно, из
understands
этого родится какой-то файл.
that you usually have a suspected part. And quite naturally, there's a file where you'd like to look for it. And according to the classic approach, it works like this. So we say, give us the hottest functions in terms of
Как вы понимаете, что может
time
тормозить Data Scientist?
the program spends on. So as you understand what can work slowly for a data science, I'm sure they will be using pandas. The question is where? There's a lot of code. So off the cuff, of course, I had some suspicions where I should look. In the first place. But of course you have to get your suspicions confirmed. The only problem is that it's not really easy to look, and then when you start looking, there are quite a lot of them. So, thank God, C profile now integrates very well with different utilities. For instance, I prefer to immediately take a look at snake viz, what's called plane graphs. The only difference is that usually they write it from top to bottom, and snake viz does it from bottom to top. So, like trees, I think these guys, got some understanding. This visualization always helps me. Okay, I see there's this main pie. That's the point of entry to the whole Python process. And it's clear that the whole it takes a lot of time. From this, in the process method, in the monitor pie file, I think it takes like 90% of all time. Some other thing takes 90% of this, then common pie, then lag. The only thing that there's a little problem there, because starting from a certain point in time, these would be functions that are not your own. These will be surely those from some standard library. Because even in Python, we don't write the code. We just use the pre-written code. So functions will stop at some level, and pure Python functions will start. And we see all the libraries that put a brake on the performance. And you can find where our functions stop and look at it. You remember this excellent idea: functions should be short, 3 lines, 5 lines, okay, more. Because if the profiler showed you that this function works slowly, and then you have 200 lines, then you get into a second problem that C profile will not be able to solve for you, because it only does it at the function level. It only shows you this function runs for a long time. This is being called a lot. If the functions are short, then it's going to become obvious for you. Who could write it? Of course, it's not me, and you'll have to check. But if there's another more standard situation, you remember data science code, you open it, and there are 200 lines, and you say, which one? Pandas would be almost 1 in every 2, because a data scientist won't be able to do it. So here, the tool won't be able to help it. Although the simplicity of launch and simplicity of visualization shows you that it's a good thing. So maybe something else will happen. So to save you, there's a separate tool. It belongs to even a different class of profilers. It's called line profilers. Its super feature is that it can do it line by line. This example of detecting or calculating the pi number. Well, everyone knows how you can calculate the pi number using the theory of probabilities. That's quite an obvious example. I just wanted to have a profile where an example where the line profiler shows what takes most time. So let's take a look at the time column. So it appears that multiplication with assignment takes most time. Also, indexation takes a lot of time. Those who do Python know that indexation is the usual problem. For some reason, it takes quite a lot of time. Everything else doesn't take any time at all. It's very interesting to take a look at the line where NumPy is called, where an array is generated about 100 elements, and it only takes like 4% of time. It's NumPy. It's fast by definition. Python is slow, NumPy is fast, and we remember that. Everything would be good, and that'd be enough for me, unless one very harmful habit. I love running profilers right on the production code. If the process is running, I like to apply the profilers, because what's the other alternative? I can do the staging environment, I can use some staging data, and then I can try to run this expensive test with the same size. I'm usually just lazy. It's much easier for me to just connect to a production service. I can connect. Usually it's not for a long time, like for a couple of minutes. And by the way, a couple of maybe 10 minutes would be enough to collect enough information. With C profile, this trick works. You can manage switching on and switching off from the outside, but with line profiler, it does work, because with it, even the launch was 4 times slower, and it would be quite normal for line profilers to reduce the speed of the program by the factor of 10. And you have to understand that this is under load and it shouldn't stop. So it's cool. I don't need to have more details, but surely we'll find the lines of code that are written badly. But I can't do it on a production server. I can write some example get the information, find the main problem, and solve it. But not in production. So what then to do? Can anybody or anything help us? Let's cast a look towards perf. Linux perf is a tool has positioned itself as a profiler for the operating system. So therefore, it has both an advantage and a disadvantage. It only works in Linux, so it was a good joke from this point of view. And here, I can't, be 100% sure that Linux is fast. Windows is slow, Linux is fast, right? It may be, and by the way, when I was talking to Alexei Milovidov, asking him, Alexei, you have heard this slogan, ClickHouse doesn't stop. I said,
чтобы это работало, нужно делать одну очень простую вещь. Вы бы что ни писали, новые фичи бы не добавляли, вы их постоянно просто замеряете.
You're working on it. You should be doing it from the beginning, adding new features. How much performance they steal from you? If you try to start doing it from the middle of development of large projects, then not always will it go smoothly. So probably the fact that its tool is being used right now to update the kernel because this has been done from the outset, and it's become popular not only among C people who write Linux kernels. I, for one, got introduced to this more than 10 years ago when I was writing on C++. Yes, there were competitors there, but even then, on the Linux platform, it was believed that if you can't afford Intel early tune, then take perf. So basically, it has become a tool of reference, tool of choice, not only for operating system developers, but for C and C++ developers. It's curious, I noticed that the Java people have already come to use it. By the way, Java machine has also learned to work with perf, and I recently came across a masterclass explaining how Java people are using perf. Of course, the utilities are the same, but the tool remains the same. So what I'm talking about, if you open release Nose 3.12, then the question becomes, what have you done before? People, you can say different beautiful things, like we were fixing the interpreter, we were removing different drawbacks from the release. Well, maybe there are some points to that. For instance, in addition, support for perf has been added. And what's important, not only for CPython. For CPython, it could be used earlier because CPython is written in C. But for the Python code, that's an old thing. And here we should dwell for a little bit longer and see what's been added. Actually, they added quite a small thing, but it's very useful. But you've seen the trend. It started like 3 or 4 versions ago. This mantra, Python works slowly, probably pushed the developers to do something with the interpreter. And every new release reports about speeding up. Firstly, the interpreter. I saw a cool curve showing a standard data scientist error. They, build linear regression on 2 points. They say if the Python keeps improving the way it does, in 3 years it will be faster than C++. It's like the standard error.
Давайте заглянем. А что добавили?
So, but let's have a look. What they added, how can you use it, and when it doesn't work. Unfortunately, there's always a situation where something doesn't work. First thing, if we just take
Я просто беру, делаю git
and launch, I do go to Git, download a fresh Python, that make and run some small benchmark. And I launch it with the generation of a Linux perf report. I'm not showing the instructions as such. You can use the links, which I'll give at the end of the presentation. But I'm showing showing the output. Actually, it starts showing us something that is not clearly understandable. It doesn't look like our code. It shows something like C Python, and then there will always be a point of entry, so by eval frame. By the way, the next presentation will be about C Python and JIT, but I'll also highlight for you that this perhaps is the biggest part of code, the huge switch for all the structures in the global machine. So any function, when it's being run in Python, this thing is executed. So this thing takes it all up, which means that if you have three functions executed, so in this graph, all these three coefficients will sum up. Because so far perf doesn't understand that it's Python code. It sees that it's a C program. Well, Python was written on C, so it starts profiling the C program. With those 07 OF, 90, we're all supposed to be able to learn it, as the authors probably surmise. But it's clear that this output is absolutely useless. After that, you say, well, we can just close it and leave. Actually, this is wrong. You can actually add something and reassemble it with a certain option. By the way, reassembling Python is a nice procedure. It almost always assembles, and it's quite surprising for me for such a large project. I rarely encounter the situation. And starting with version 3.12, you get a whole lot of new features. There's an interpreter option, there's variable environment, there's stat collection. And what happens? Quite an exciting thing happens in the same report, but regenerated with this option. You start getting something looking at Python functions. Py, run test, py bench, .py, all this multi-point things that resemble things in C++, but these are Python functions. But what's happening under the hood? Quite a simple thing, actually. The interpreter starts generating special files, special maps, where it starts to put things. So this address that you were using all the time, it's this function. This address is that function. So it starts everything that used to be part of the same object, eval data frame. It starts passing it into separate functions. So in essence, it starts behaving like a C profile. It starts giving us reports as to how much time each of our functions took. It's very good. Perf was initially designed as utility that you connect to on the fly. It becomes very useful when you just want to connect to a running service for maybe a few minutes. And after which, when you've gotten the information, to pass this information. And the visualization that I'm showing you is the visualization that's built into perf. It has utility that can draw this text-based UI. It's very user-uncomfortable, user-unfriendly, because everybody wants to work in a browser. So you need to use some tool to, turn it into something graphic, because of course it's very difficult to analyze these text lines with your eyes. There are quite a lot of utilities, specialized for perf, and they will help you both for Java, C++, so Python code, writing this kind of graphs. This comes from Robert Gregg. By the way, I don't like how they're drawn. It's obvious that it wasn't the design. It was an engineer who built that. Well, he tried to do something with the colors, but the red color here is default color. I don't know what kind of monitor he's using. Actually, it's not very comfortable for my eyes to look at this. I just remember the mantra, because perf is a tool that's popular for a lot of developers in different languages. They develop their own tools. For instance, when I was using perf for C++ and C++, I just knew that I should go to the Firefox team, because they have a ready-made plugin and a site, Firefox Profiler, where you can add perf file, and it will be drawn in a much more elegant way. Of course, it means that initially you have to reprofile Firefox, but the idea took up quite well, and so this of the readily available profilers, it's one of the best that can work with with Python. I wanted to do an organization, and so I wanted to run it here live, but the organizer say, you better not do that. Of course, something can... So I just added the screenshots. By the way, I think the designer was the same here. There are a lot of other things for JavaScript that I don't use, but I just don't go to those links because they'll be empty. Because if we're loading a perf file not from true Firefox but from some other program, it'll only draw what it can. So this is quite a simple visualization, and that's enough for me. Here I have a refined example where the root of evil can be seen quite easily, at least contains. Usually there are several peaks, and by the way, they're usually not too many, 5 or 6 hottest functions. It's quite realistic to see them with your own eyes. The only thing you should remember that functions like that, not 3 lines of codes. What's making the system work slowly? Can perf help here, just like providers, by not also making the program work slower? Because with perf, I couldn't notice the overhead. Yes, it does quite a non-trivial work, but I never saw it, slowing down programs a lot. So basically, it's unnoticeable. Of course, you can look and say, so there's a function and there are no other function calls there. So let's see what is there. Unfortunately, we'll again see Python there. The only subtlety is that if the function is short, it can bring us to the idea of maybe at which line, but at least what, roughly. You remember that line profiler picture? It said something wrong with this line and something wrong with multiplication. Try to do something with multiplication. This here we have a prompt that you have to do something with multiplication. But if you have 10 lines with multiplication, then it's done. So I thought perf has one more way to look. You can go even deeper. There, where even plus people don't like to go. I don't know if it makes sense for Python people, because in real life we can jump from the Python code into CPython and from there to assembly language code. There's little sense, little use for that. But I recall a situation that I used to encounter when you were doing things in C++, but you had to do tracing and debugging. So you had to trace both your own code and the C and C++ code. Well, in that case, this would have made sense, perhaps, to look at all this legend, all these. But basically, it's an interesting world that opens up for you. You know, when in Python conference they start showing bits of CPython, so that is considered to be a hardcore presentation, but when they start showing assembly code parts in a Python conference, that would be the hardest core. So I'm not sure yet what kind of use you can get from that. My use was to show you such a funny slide, but for myself, perhaps wouldn't be able to derive anything useful from this presentation. Although in actual fact, a couple of ideas were born from this. So this won't help us a lot. But there are things that could help. And here we have a separate line that I will just announce, supporting by a simple example. If you remember that perf is a planner for Linux, you start to understand it's not only about the processor, the CPU. There are a lot of other things that can work slowly. Memory can work slowly. System calls, The hard drive can work slowly. Network connections can be slow. Cache can be work slowly. So a whole system of events that are happening in the operating system that affects our software. You know, the classic error of a performance specialist is that they see the CPU load at 100% and says, that's it, the CPU is fully loaded, you can't do anything. But I'll tell you what, when CPU is 100%, is 100% loaded, most likely it's just waiting to get something from memory, and it's not doing any work now. So not all profilers help. And by the way, C profile practically doesn't go in that direction. With perf is the functionality that's inbuilt. You can set up the counters, selecting what you would like to keep an eye on. For instance, I encountered a situation where I have IPs, I go to QoS, to DNS, I want to know everything about these IPs, and I've noticed that somehow it works slowly. And so I say it's either myself who wrote the code poorly or some of the system calls works poorly. And the profiling of the network system showed that it was the DNS service that worked slowly. So by default, it was synchronous DNS, and it didn't work, so the async DNS was getting connected. Whereas the CPU wasn't doing anything, it was just waiting until the data is delivered. So if you set it up to connecting network events, then you immediately get understanding. So this is an exciting way of using a perf for Python included when 3.12 will be able to have 3.12 onwards. You can set up the current Python as well, but you remember what I'm going to show you. All your network calls were going as part of paywall and no other details. But when we start getting updated, updating Docker containers, and so we'll get a new interpreter in our hands. Then I'm hoping we're going to get a lot more opportunities for such detailed profiling. And in conclusions, I still have some time. We also have some time for questions. By the way, I love questions. I love questions much better than my presentations. And we have prizes. So in my opinion, even though the statement is beautiful, Linux perf is today part of Python 3.12. You shouldn't forget about the old tools. They still can, like profile, low profile, what perf, where perf won't help us. So we are not ready to expect a full victory of the new tool, but a strong expansion. I often use several tools. For this profiling, I use C profile and to look what's happening with what network connections, which of them make me wait the longest. Then it may be of interest for me to take a look at perf counters. Of course, there are situations where they will match, coincide, when we're using synchronous code and we're waiting at the socket, but we're done over sync IO. So the fact that we're waiting at the socket won't tell us how long we had to wait for specific network packets. And also, if you are debugging at the same time, you have to debug and profile at the same time. I mean, both the Python code and C code, that will surely be the best tool, because it's part of the same visualization. It will be able to show you both the first layer and the second layer, and maybe you can even see what's happening at the assembly language level. But you should not always trust that. If you're interested to go through and take a look more details about the commands I was using, well, unfortunately, I'm not a writer, but more of a storyteller. So if somebody has an idea of, putting this together as a set of papers, you can use this information. Or maybe I'll finally find the time to do that. So thank you for your
Мне было бы
attention.
очень интересно, да,
I would be very interested to
взглянуть на результаты опроса, если кто-то в начале вот
take a look at the results of the poll if you've used
то ли
the
у меня не
QR
работает
code.
интернет.
So it's either my internet is not working. What can be
Ну,
happening?
пока будут задавать вопросы, я,
So
может,
while I'm
что-нибудь
asking questions, maybe I'll be able to fix something.
Linux Linux, а раздает с айфончика.
у нас эти
So
подарки, да?
we have gifts, right?
Подарок один за один вопрос.
За сотый.
One gift for one question. For the
За
100th.
сотый это как будто ругательство
For the
какое-то.
100th, you mean?
Типа, у меня за сотый сетевой.
In Russian,
У
that
меня вопрос к опросу.
sounds like a swear word.
Дата-сайентист. Ну,
You are a data scientist,
либо line-профайлер, либо C-профайлер.
but why couldn't you use one profiler, either line profiler or C profiler? But we should fit within some framework. By the way, I don't like these multiple answer
И, в принципе, мне кажется,
tests,
тест
because then you'd be
показывает,
thinking which of them is important. I think the test, the picture shows everything. Everybody is just geniuses. They are capable of reading into the code and immediately see the wrong line. Or maybe they're just not aware of other tools. By the way, I would really like this balance to change
Скажи мне,
somehow.
как дейсер, почему такой тоталитарный, да?
Why so totalitarian?
Спасибо за доклад.
Thank you for your presentation.
Вот как раз я
Basically, the question is,
когда есть social
I myself encountered a situation where I have an ISO file and I was linking it to Python. So the question, if I have some neural network in the ISO file that runs some GPU computations, is there a way to measure using this perf how it's run on the GPU? Sending data between cores and memory and back. Is my understanding correct that perf ISO works right out of the box?
целых два вопроса.
There are two questions here. Question one.
Файлик подготовлен.
If the ISO file has been prepared, to be more specific, if debugging symbols have not been deleted, if it's prepared, that is, it includes the debugging symbols, then yes, you will be able to see that. Second part, GPU, yes, you'll be able to see some things, for instance, the sending time, but still, GPUs have their own profilers, either from Intel or from NVIDIA. So if you need to see what's inside GPU, I don't remember if perf can do that. So most likely, it'll only be able to show you which functions have run for the longest time. Whereas in the GPU, for instance, the tensor cores have been, or kernels have been written badly. So perhaps it's not a question to it. Last row, microphone.
Сразу видно стажер. Да. Пожалуйста.
Спасибо за доклад. А вот
Thank you for your presentation.
Там не было PySpy.
You didn't have PySpy as a list of profilers. Was that a conscious decision or just forgot it?
Скорее всего, забыл, но
Perhaps I just forgot about it.
основных немного. Я не помню,
But
по-моему, основы просто начал.
yeah, I think it was just based on something. It's either C profile or is it homegrown? I think it's homegrown. Well, thank you. It means also very good. Thanks for profiling.
Спасибо.
Это, кстати,
Thank
моя
you.
любимая часть.
And by the way, this is my favorite part of such a session. When you've been asked a question, why don't you have this thing? And then you go, like, open it and just starts working.
Следующий вопрос. Сейчас первый ряд, последний.
Next
потом в
question.
серединку пойдем.
First row, last one, and then beginning. Thank you for your presentation. The presentation is about Linux perf, but you've been saying we're waiting 3.12 all the time. So are we waiting or are we using? We're waiting and then using. So it appears that you can't use now. So the experiment phase, yes, but in production, I would be a bit cautious using 3.12.
Пока классику.
So are we still to use classics? Yes, so it's just a provocation for the future. Mike,
Спасибо за доклад.
thank you for the presentation. Very exciting.
Прямо вот.
Я честно говоря,
Please hold the microphone close to the mouth. Frankly, I wasn't even aware that you can profile Python
язык
based on the feedback.
к сожалению,
lots of people didn't either.
Вопрос вот какой. Дело в
So
том,
the
что бывает
question.
иногда, что по строчкам профилируешь,
Sometimes it happens that you do profiling line by line, and you see that the line runs slowly. I had a case like that with Panda. You call it by index, by key. By index runs fast, by key much slower, 4 times. So how to calculate these things?
Хороший вопрос, хороший
A
вопрос.
good question.
Обычно, ну, если
Usually,
вот, ты даже нашел строчку, но не можешь понять, что с
when
ней
you've
сделать,
already found the line but don't know what to do
я
with it,
действую так. Это не универсальный способ, но я пишу
what I do is like this. I write a micro benchmark with only this mini function, measure it,
думать и
and
экспериментировать.
start thinking
А на что
and
ее можно
experimenting.
заменить? Просто так по интуиции.
What
пытаясь подумать,
it can be replaced
что
with,
может
just
происходить.
using my
Помогает изучение
intuition.
исходников.
And by the
Можно
way,
еще почитать
reading the
исходники и
source
понять,
code
что же там
helps.
делают
You can read the
такого,
source code,
что
trying
оно
to
так занимает
understand
много времени.
what are they
Часто
doing
исходники
there
нужно
so that it
править
takes so
хотя бы.
much time to run. It doesn't always mean that you need to correct anything, but
Ее сосед
more
быстрее.
likely you'll be able to understand why it runs slowly and its neighbor runs faster. So it's not a universal answer, but I hope as an idea it'll help you.
Спасибо.
There are a lot
Ну,
of
ты же
questions.
хотел быть популярным.
You wanted to be popular, right?
Я
Am I not?
Ты очень.
I will.
Ну,
You are very.
Во-первых, ты умный.
Look, firstly, you're clever.
Красивый.
Second, you are
Это
handsome.
просто констатация факта.
And I'm just, it's not a compliment, I'm just
Я бы
stating.
хотел узнать,
Thank you for your
речь уже
presentation.
шла о C-Python, а
You
как же
were
другие
talking about C-Python and
реализации
how
Python, такие как PyPy
about
или
other
Python, например.
Python
Или
implementations such as
Iron
Happy and Jita or Iron Python.
Последние два я в живой природе
The last two, I don't see in the wild
В основном,
anymore.
когда говорят, ну вот у нас есть
But I also see very rarely.
Но на самом деле это такой шутовской ответ. Честный ответ такой. PyPy, он же написан на Python.
PyPy has been written on Python. And of course, I can't work with perf, but
Свои собственные встроенные
it
инструменты.
has its own tools that work quite well. Because how does it work? It does profiling itself when it works, and it converts the pieces of codes itself when it's running. I just don't remember if it can build reports. If it can build reports, then it contains a profiler in itself. But perf is not supported as far as I know.
А вот на
Okay, thank you.
Там давно тоже красивый.
I think another handsome guy is holding a hand for a long time. Thank you for the presentation. You said that you need to recompile Python. Why do you need to recompile it? Is it because this new Python version has not been released, and when it's out there, will I be able to just to rerun it? Some pieces of CPython may not come up. Why? Because there are certain flags. Never delete parts of the stack frame. If you don't need CPython, you don't need to recompile. You can say run with the -x option. And I'll be able to see the Python function in perf. Yes, yes.
Мне очень понравилось.
And I just liked very much when they said,
Та версия Python,
so
да,
Та
пожалуйста.
самая.
that is the Python version is not out there. Yes. Thank you for the presentation. Question one. Did you try to compare this utility with Bitune, or Microsoft has now support of Python in the studio? So what are the pluses and minuses? No, I haven't done comparison. You can see I'm a Linux guy.
Python умеет, да?
So firstly, Intel Python can.
Спасибо.
Well, perhaps it does. I just wasn't aware of that. I didn't compare with them. Question two.
Сишники, понятно, они почти всегда с собой...
Well, C people, it's clear about C people. They usually take a lot of libraries with themselves, they compile them themselves, and there it goes. You can compile, so that debugging symbols are there. But we have PyPy, and most libraries are installed from
И
code
ждать там
and
отладочных
things like
символов
that,
не
and
приходится.
expecting debugging symbols is something
Понятно,
that
что можно
you
попытаться пойти на
won't be
GitLab,
able to. Of
GitHub,
course, you can get to
скопировать,
GitHub,
собрать отладочными символами, но
you know,
не всегда получится, прямо так сказать.
assemble it with
Есть
the
какие-то
symbols, but it doesn't always
телодвижения,
work.
чтобы, ну, условно,
Are there any moves you
на
can make
пайпе тот же самый
so
поставлять
that
с отладочными символами, хотя бы как
you
идея.
could
Я думаю, что там
supply it on
таких
pipe
сложений не
with
делают, я
symbols?
их, по крайней мере, точно не
Well, I
видел.
don't think they do
Единственный
anything
нюанс,
like that.
все-таки
I haven't
можно
seen them at
попросить
least.
ставить не из
But the only
можно
thing
попросить
is
компилировать.
that
Но
you
всё
can
равно,
ask
как
them
бы,
to compile.
даже если попросить
Пип можно
компилировать,
попросить компилировать.
он тебя
Compile and
с
recompile.
не
Recompile.
компилирует.
They won't
Переменное окружение для
compile
компиляторов.
with symbols
И тогда просто
by
все, что компилирует, он добавит,
also
а там
adding
да, по сути,
the
чтобы откладочная информация не удалялась,
environment
чтобы
information to the
всякие фреймы
compilation,
ломались.
so that it shouldn't delete the debugging
Ну, по сути,
information
понятно,
and
правда, все
stack frames
все не
not
привыкли
being
компилировать
optimized.
пипом, но в принципе он это умеет делать.
So basically, people are not used
Так,
to
правая часть зала.
use PEEP for
Теперь
compiling,
ваш
but it
ход.
can do
Это
that.
была Армения, здесь
So,
Сербия. Отвечайте,
right
пожалуйста.
side of the room, this is your move.
Задайте
It
свои
was
умные вопросы,
Armenia, now it's
красивые.
Serbia.
Пока все еще левая
So,
хочет.
out with your
Ладно,
questions.
возвращаемся в Армению.
Okay, we go back to Armenia.
Спасибо за доклад. Меня зовут
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Gleb.
Все профилировщики поддерживают
I know that not all profilers support multi-threaded applications. How is perf with that? Yes, it works very well. It recognizes each thread and can build the correct call stack for it. The only thing that's useful for Python, because there's little sense writing multi-threaded Python apps. But if there's a call to some C function that spawns threads, yes, it can do it on each thread separately or do it all together if the function jumps from different threads.
такой маленький overhead.
Is it statistical if it shows such low overhead? That's right. It's not deterministic. It's statistical. It samples within some point of time. You can't trust these numbers completely, but if the sampling is run frequently, you
Давайте
can.
на последнем ряду
The
позволим
last row.
молодому человеку задать еще один вопрос, и
let-
потом начнем конкурс вопросов. Вы должны выбрать,
Лучше.
Allow
Меня навели
the guy to ask the last question.
Не с threadами, а с процессами.
My question is not about threads, but with processes. How does it work with them? If I start running sub-processes
ускорить вычисления и все дела.
to speed up
По-моему, нет. Он не распространяет.
computations, what next?
Сказать, что вот подключись еще к этому пиду.
Well, by default, it doesn't do that, but you can separately tell it connect to
какой
this
вопрос для
pin.
тебя
It can do it on the
ценнее
fly.
всего с точки зрения
What,
вот векторных
which question was the highest value for you in terms of future development? For us, the biggest value is what I learned that I haven't known earlier. So I like the question about that showed me
Отличный подарок. Спасибо.
showed me what you didn't know. I learned quite a lot today.
Спасибо
So
большое.
that
Тебе
guy.
тоже
Cool. Thank you very much.
памятный приз от
So
PythonConf.
Спасибо.
Великолепно.
another gift for you from Moscow Python Conf.
Ни слова про
Great bag. Not a word about
На 5
X5.
минут раньше закончил.
You finished 5 minutes
я
earlier,
разгадал
but
секрет правой части зала. Короче,
I
они
solved the
ждут тебя
secret
в
of the
кулуарах.
right
Я не
part of the room.
убегаю.
They're waiting for you in the
На
lobby.
солнышко и задавайте
So,
ему
okay,
вопросы,
take the speaker out
которые
to
он
the sun,
ответит честно. не
and
на
ask him
запись.
questions that
Спасибо большое.
he'll answer to.
Это был
Спасибо.
Frankly,
Frankly,
друзья, Python ныряем через
off the record.
15 минут.
So thank
А
you.
пока технический перерыв,
So,
проветривание там и
technical
ну,
break
кофе совсем
now.
не допьет.
And of course,